This video is on levers, and in particular on the different classes of levers. A lever is simply anything that can be used for prying or lifting that includes a pivot point and an object, which is, let me say, the pivot point is called the fulcrum. And then you use a piece of wood or a stiff bar of some sort to pry or lift as it pivots on the fulcrum. There are three main parts to a lever, to any lever. You have the fulcrum, which again is the pivot point. You have the input, and if you remember from the first video, input is always the person, also known as the effort. And then you have the output, which is the object that you're moving or lifting, sometimes called the load, sometimes called the resistance. But those would be the three main parts of any lever. It is the arrangement of those three things, the fulcrum, the input, and the output, that determines what class of lever that you have. Now, you're probably familiar with levers when you think about prying, when you think about lifting. Most people think about this first one, which is a first class lever. It looks like a teeter-totter, and that is probably one that is the most common. You can shift the location of the fulcrum or the pivot point. You can think of a pry bar as being also a first class lever. But the first class lever, if we go to the next one, has the pivot point in the middle. Now this picture shows a pliers, which is actually two first class levers attached together. The output would be the nut or bolt or whatever object that you're trying to move down here in the end, output force. Oops, sorry. The output force is down here. The input force is your hands, goes on the other end. Okay, the hands will be down here on the other end. And then the fulcrum is where those two pivot together. And the reason that I say that this is two levers in one is if you think about this, here is one lever and here's the other lever, that they are attached at the fulcrum and they both can move. Another common first class lever that's actually a double first class lever would be a scissors, because it looks very much like this pliers. But the key to a first class lever is the pivot point, or the fulcrum, is in the middle. You can have the fulcrum closer to the output, you can have it closer to the input, it doesn't matter as long as it is the thing that is in between the forces. For a second class lever, the fulcrum is on one end, and it doesn't matter which end it is. What matters is that the output, or the thing that you're moving, is in between the fulcrum and the input. So again, this is like your hand and the thing you're moving. This is showing an old-fashioned bottle opener. I don't know if many of you use this kind of, have you ever seen a bottle opener like this? But when you lift on the input, the fulcrum pivots on the top of the lid, and then the piece down here pries that lid off. The bottle opener is definitely not the only type of second class lever, but it is the one used in this example. So if the output is in the middle, the thing you're moving is in between the other two, that makes it a second class lever. A third class lever has the input in the middle. Many of our muscles and bone attachments in our body are actually third class levers. You can think of not only the biceps, but the shoulder, in your legs, most of those things have what's called a third class lever, where the thing you're moving is out on the end, like the dumbbell. Your muscle is actually, if this is your fulcrum is the elbow, and the input, the muscle comes just in front of the elbow, meaning that the input is in between the other two. And some people don't understand when I say middle, I just mean in between the other two. I don't mean the exact middle. And so if that input force is in between the fulcrum and the output, then it is a third class lever. Now, again, I'm not going to make you memorize this, because if you recall, you get to use the note chart that you're completing on your test, but it might be helpful to have an example or two, maybe not just this drawing, but having an example or two so that you remember which one is which. One thing that you're going to do on your assignment when you get to classes of levers is being able to do this. Label the drawing with F, O, and I. F being fulcrum. O being output. In other words, the thing you're moving. I is input, which is, again, the human. So just remembering that that's what F, O, and I stand for. And then based on the arrangement of those two, what is the lever? What class, first, second, or third? Now on this rake, probably the easiest thing is where is the output? So where is the thing that I'm moving? And hopefully you realize it's the leaves down here at the bottom. So the output is going to be right down at the bottom. Here is your output right down here. The input and the fulcrum on this one might be kind of hard to decide upon, especially because when you use a rake, I think most of you realize, or a broom or any kind of sporting equipment, both hands are moving. And so how do I know which one is which? And the fulcrum is usually the one that moves the least, and the input is the one that does most of the work. And so if you imagine using a rake, this hand is doing almost all of the effort. And so that is considered the input. And this backhand is kind of steadying everything. So that would be the fulcrum. And so in this lever, you have the input in the middle. So this would be, if I go back to my notes, if I look input in the middle, oh, that's going to be a third class lever. So a rake is a third class lever. If I look at a wheelbarrow, where's the fulcrum? Well, the fulcrum is the part that doesn't move when I lift, so that's going to be the wheel. Fulcrum is the wheel. The output, where's the stuff I'm trying to move? It's going to be right here in the middle, in the bucket. And the input, my hands are going to be down here on this other end. So looking back at the notes and finding the one that has the output in between the other two, this will be a second class lever. And it is really by labeling the diagram, or at least thinking about the diagram, that you figure out which class of lever it is. Not memorizing, but looking at the arrangement and then matching that up to the diagrams that we used in the notes. This one was even used maybe as an example. The fulcrum, the pivot point, is going to be right here in the middle. And on this run, in all honesty, it doesn't matter if you decide this kid is the output and this kid is the input, or if you decide this kid is that it's the opposite, that this is input and this is output. Either way I look at it, the fulcrum is in between the other two, which makes this a first class lever. So go ahead and do the assignment on classes of levers before you move on to mechanical advantage, just because it probably is better to have an idea of which type of lever is which before you go and worry about mechanical advantage of levers.